Welcome back, warriors. Kwe Tanse Sego. Hi, my name is Pam Palmater, and welcome to my YouTube channel where we focus on educating the resistance and inspiring the next generation of warriors to help us save our peoples and the planet. Today marks 30 years since the 78-day siege at Kanehsatake by the Sûreté de Quebec and the Canadian Army. Kanien'kehà were defending their lands against the Town of Oka's plans to expand a golf course over their sacred burial grounds and their lands known as the Pines. Today, Kanien'kehà from Kahnehsatake and Kahnawake are engaged in rolling blockades to mark the day. And all over Turtle Island, Native peoples are continuing to defend our lands against the constant threat of land theft and destruction by governments and industry. So stay tuned to hear more about how important it is to both honor and support our grassroots native land defenders all over Turtle Island. Today, Kanien'kehà or Mohawks from Kahnehsatake and Kahnawake are engaged in rolling blockades to mark 30 years since the 78-day siege at Kahnehsatake by the Quebec's SQ and the Canadian Army. July 11th is a day that stands out in the hearts and minds of Native peoples all over Turtle Island because it symbolizes the violence of the Canadian state in its relentless quest to control every last inch of our lands. July 11th was the start of the siege against Kahnehsatake. Many Canadians believe that the violent colonization of Native peoples and our lands is something in the far-off past. But it was only 30 years ago that 4,000 soldiers with tanks, grizzlies, helicopters, and heavy artillery were deployed against Mohawks at Kahnehsatake and Kahnawake. Imagine the incredible human and financial cost of sending in the army to defend a golf course. It sounds unimaginable. But in fact, today, just like 30 years ago and just like 100 years ago, Canada can and has used every weapon of force at its disposal to prevent us from governing our own traditional territories. It was only 4 months ago that heavily armed RCMP officers with helicopters, armored vehicles, and snipers moved in to remove peaceful Wet'suwet'en peoples from their lands in order to protect a pipeline. And only 6 years ago, a massive deployment of heavily armed and militarized RCMP officers and snipers violently removed Mi'kmaq peoples from our lands, essentially acting like private security for hydrofrackers. And these are not isolated incidents. The Canadian state regularly engages in armed and violent interventions to remove us from our lands. Whether it is starving us to death, stealing our children into foster care, allowing our women to be exploited, disappeared, or murdered, or imprisoning us at alarming rates, Canada continues to remove us from our lands. And the word for that is genocide, the worst crime that can be committed in the law. The National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls found, as a matter of fact and law, that all levels of government in Canada are guilty of ongoing genocide. Quote, Canada's colonial history provides ample evidence of the existence of a genocidal policy, a manifest pattern of similar conduct which reflects an intention to destroy Indigenous peoples. And they went on to conclude, Canada has displayed a continuous policy with shifting express motives, but an ultimately steady intention to destroy Indigenous peoples physically, biologically, and as social units. And we are still here, trying to navigate Canada's genocidal laws and policies in a context of violent suppression of our rights, especially our lands. At the heart of our Native identities, cultures, and sovereignties is our land. It is the core of everything about where we come from, who we are, how we govern ourselves, and where our responsibilities lie. While our sovereign nations vary in terms of all different languages, practices, and laws, there is a common thread in our legal systems that requires us, according to our own specific laws, to protect our lands and waters. Elders from all over Turtle Island have explained that we don't have a choice. It's our obligation to protect our lands. And when you think about Canadian law in relation to Aboriginal title, for example, the courts have said that a core part of Aboriginal title is that we claim it as ours to the exclusion of other people. So to not defend our lands would not only breach all of our native laws, but it would in fact be a strike against us in Canadian law. So we have no choice but to defend our lands, even in the face of violent state repression of our peoples. That is why today is so important. Today is a day to listen to Kanien'kehà voices about the significance of the siege against their people in 1990 and the many unresolved land issues that still exist. Today is also a day to either remember or to learn. Either way, it's a day to take action to support Native land rights. Today is also a day to celebrate our victories all over Turtle Island. And some of you might be thinking, what victories? We're still facing genocide and violence and racism and oppression and land theft. Yeah, that's all true. But even within that larger context of oppression, and even with all of our struggles, we have to be able to acknowledge and celebrate all of our successes. We need to celebrate and honor the people at the heart of each victory on the battlefield, even if it's a small victory or a temporary one. They are still victories. We have so much to show our children about how much of a difference we have made. Let's just use the pandemic as an example. Just prior to COVID-19 hitting Turtle Island, many Native peoples were engaged in solidarity actions with the Wet'suwet'en Nation's hereditary leaders and clan members in defense of their lands. They were peaceful actions that occupied railways, highways, streets, ports, and even legislatures and ministers' offices. The message was very clearly for the RCMP and Coastal GasLink pipeline to get off Wet'suwet'en lands because they didn't have consent under Wet'suwet'en laws. Then the pandemic hits, and pandemic measures included no public gatherings. And these restrictions significantly impacted our ability to protest. Yet, governments provided exceptions for the extractive industry to continue with their pipeline constructions and mining, for example. We couldn't gather to protest, but man camps in the hundreds were allowed to gather to continue their destruction of our lands. At the same time, provinces were relaxing environmental laws, Alberta Premier Jason Kenney revived the Keystone XL pipeline, and Alberta Energy Minister Sonia Savage even said it was a good time to build pipelines because the pandemic prevents protests. This is a blatant breach of our native rights. But our land defense comes in many forms, and not all of them are protests. So, despite the many breaches of our native rights and despite the unfair advantages for the extractive industry, it soon became clear that our battles are won based on the work that we have been doing for many years in many arenas. In other words, a few months of restricted gathering rules is not enough to stop our resistance movement, which has been 500 years in the making. So today, let's celebrate all of the hard work that led up to these victories that all happened during the pandemic. The first one, on July 6th, the U.S. Supreme Court refused to let construction start on TC Energy's Keystone Oil Sands pipeline. That means that the construction of the pipeline is delayed until at least 2020, which is a major hit to Alberta, who committed more than $5 billion to revive that pipeline. On the same day, July 6th, a federal judge ordered the Dakota Access Pipeline to shut down and remove all oil from that pipeline within 30 days. That's a huge win for Standing Rock Sioux Nation tribe and their allies who fought so hard to protect their lands and waters from this pipeline. Now, pipeline officials have declared that they will not abide by the order, so they went back to court. However, on July 10th, a federal judge rejected their request to halt the order. So, the order stands unless and until there is a successful appeal. Number 3. Also in July, the BC government ordered Coastal GasLink pipeline to stop construction within wetland areas until surveys and mitigation plans could be completed. Their pipeline construction has already affected at least 42 wetlands and could impact hundreds more on Wet'suwet'en territory. Another victory came in July when Dominion Energy and Duke Energy announced the cancellation of the Atlantic Coast Pipeline, a natural gas pipeline from West Virginia to North Carolina, citing legal uncertainty. The pipeline faced numerous legal challenges and public pushback. This is another huge win for grassroots activists on the ground working together to protect the environment. On July 3rd, the Newfoundland courts quashed Corridor Resources' oil exploration license. The court said that Newfoundland Offshore Petroleum Board lacked the authority to extend the license beyond its original term. This was to be an extension for a license for oil exploration in the Gulf of St. Lawrence that would have negatively impacted sensitive ecosystems and hundreds of species of marine life, like the right whale. Also on July 3rd, Tailings Insurance and Finance Company confirmed that they are dropping insurance coverage of Trans Mountain Pipeline. Another insurance company, Munich Re, is also expected to drop their coverage of the pipeline as well. This great news comes after Stand Earth delivered a petition of more than 50,000 names of people asking the 26 insurance companies to refuse to cover the Trans Mountain Pipeline. In May, the Supreme Court of Canada denied Taseko's request to appeal the federal government's rejection of their planned Prosperity Mine. It was supposed to be an open-pit gold and copper mine in Chilcotin territory. But studies showed that the mine would cause irreversible environmental damage. But Taseko tried to forge ahead anyway. This is a huge victory for the Chilcotin because they have been fighting for control over their territory for decades. And just as the pandemic was starting in late February, Teck Resources canceled its plans to build Frontier Oil Sands Mine. It was slated to be a massive open pit mine in the oil sands that had already been approved by Alberta and the federal government. Now, there was already some doubt that the mine could ever be built given the low oil prices, but Teck Resources cited a lack of certainty around climate change and Indigenous rights. Nevertheless, they're gone. Yes, I know, many of you are thinking, well, Canadian and US courts are problematic. Yeah, they are. It's their judges, their laws, and often their decisions serve to limit our rights. You might also be thinking that some of these court orders are only temporary. Yep, that's true too. They may be appealed in a week, a month, or next year. And some of you may even be worried that some of these projects could be reinvigorated. And that's true, they could. Some may reincorporate and file new applications. All of that's true. But they all face the same challenge. They have to face us. No matter what the victory, short-lived or long-term, what I know for sure is that none of us would be here were it not for the strength, determination, and persistence of our ancestors who fought for our rights to be Mi'kmaq, Kanien'kehà, Wet'suwet'en, or Creek. Settler governments in Canada and the US have created a complex web of laws, policies, and practices, societal norms, and economic systems that are deeply ingrained with racism and violence against us, and they treat our lands and our peoples like exploitable resources. Our ancestors tried their very hardest, and many sacrificed their lives to make sure that we would all still be here today. And that is not to say we don't still suffer. We do. Genocide continues, under different names, but in the same ways. They are still removing us from our lands, still stealing our children, still exploiting, disappearing, and murdering our Indigenous women and girls, and still killing our people and incarcerating them on a massive scale. But we are still here, and we are still living, asserting, and defending our sovereignty and protecting our lands and waters. So long as we have one warrior on the ground defending our lands, these lands will always be ours, no matter how many colonial laws that may interfere with that. Today is a day to honor our ancestors and the warriors who got us this far, and support the new generation of grassroots warriors fighting every day for our rights. Our warriors are first and foremost peacekeepers and protectors based in love for our peoples and the land. And you can see the peace and love reflected in all of the warriors of our nations all over Turtle Island. So let's remember to celebrate our victories. We're still here and we are never giving up. And in honor of July 11th, Nyawan to the Kanien'kehà, to all the matriarchs, elders, warriors, and people of the Longhouse at Kahnawake and Kahnehsatake for their sacrifices and keeping the fire burning within us on Turtle Island. Thank you for watching this channel. If this is your first time here, please consider subscribing, commenting, and sharing these videos with your family, friends, colleagues, and social justice allies. And if you want additional resources, you can check out my website at www.palmater.com. I also have a Warrior Life podcast with many episodes dedicated to extended discussions with Kanien'kehà warriors on the ground doing important work. Today would be a really great day to listen to some of those voices. Thank you all so much for your support, your solidarity, and most importantly, every action you take to support the work of grassroots warriors all over Turtle Island. Till next time, stay alert, warriors.